The title of my paper is Allusion as Metonymy in Stravinsky's Later Serial Music. And you should all have a handout. The sound of example 1, 2 bars excerpted from Igor Stravinsky's serial work, Movements for Piano and Orchestra, evokes a classical era perfect cadence. Not only do the pitches and their grouping convey the familiar effect of a dominant to tonic progression, the close on low G after the downbeat of the second bar is reminiscent of a cadential mannerism that appears frequently in the piano sonatas of Haydn and Mozart. Take the cadence by Haydn shown in example 2, for instance. Replacing beat 1 of the second bar with silence illuminates such a configuration even more explicitly as a possible ancestor of Stravinsky's cadence. I will play just the dominant and tonic harmonies in Haydn's cadence, omitting beat 1 of the tonic triad. Then I will play example 1 again. So here's the Haydn, just dominant and tonic, and omitting the first beat of the second measure. And Stravinsky. Even as it alludes to an older style, the music of example 1 is consistent with both the non-pitch features and the strict adherence to serial pitch principles of the atonal work to which it belongs. Some might find the cadential allusion of example 1 difficult to perceive out of context. Within the work, however, this evocation of tonal practice is conspicuous. Indeed, I find while listening to this and other of Stravinsky's later serial works, those from movements of 1958 to 59 through The Owl and the Pussycat of 1966, that tonally evocative events often seem to leap out of the music. Although the very notion of such events would appear to contradict the essence of a strictly serial work, the frequency of their appearances in Stravinsky's last works argues that tonal allusions form a central feature of his later serial style. But what then is their role in the music? A brief clarification before I go on. In noting the tonal allusion in example 1, I am not claiming that movements is in any way tonal, that it displays quasi-tonal prolongations, or even that it exhibits pitch emphases. Rather, this semblance of a cadence evokes a tonal practice while simultaneously denying tonality through full participation in the movement's serial pitch organization. A vehicle for understanding the role of tonal allusions in Stravinsky's later serial works may be found in a musical adaptation of metonymy. As defined by psycholinguist and cognitive scientist Raymond Gibbs, metonymy occurs in speech when, quote, people take one well-understood or easily perceived aspect of something to represent or stand for the thing as a whole. Metonymy substitutes a particular instance, property, or characteristic for the general principle or function, end quote. For example, in the statement, Paris is bringing back bell-bottoms this season, Paris stands metonymically for the French fashion industry. To make sense of the sentence, we disregard the literal meaning of Paris as a location and comprehend it instead as representing an institution with which it is commonly linked. In Stravinsky's serial music, the role of the tonal allusion is analogous to that of the word Paris in the prose example. That is, we understand a reference to a tonal convention, such as the perfect cadence, as representing a particular musical principle or function typically associated with it. Allusions to tonality take many forms in Stravinsky's serial music. For example, they may appear as tertian sonorities and melodic segments, diatonic fragments and areas, and traditional forms and textures. Perhaps more powerful, however, are the allusions that suggest directionality, that is, motion to a goal or to the achievement of that goal. Among allusions in this category are evocations of cadences, dominant preparations, leading motions, dissonance and its resolution, and bass lines. Allusions associated with directionality conjure with particular strength and immediacy their associated tonal functions, which then interact with a work's fundamental serial design. Let's return to the evoked cadence shown in example 1, which marks the end of the first part of movement's tripartite fourth movement. Please turn to page 2 to see example 3A, which shows the latter half of the first part. If you are unaccustomed to Stravinsky's serial scores, please note that instruments appear only as needed and that all instruments are notated in C. The evoked perfect cadence in G seen in example 1 appears in example 3A in bars 108 to 109, which are circled on the right side of the score. Let's listen to example 3A, and as we do, listen for the cadence that we heard in example 1. Example 3A. The cadence gains much of its impact from the implied dominant seventh chord, a tertian structure that contains a dissonance, and from its partial resolution, the G emphasized by its low register. When we recognize this allusion, we likely understand it as a metonymy as well. That is, we hear the evoked perfect cadence as expressing the function perhaps most strongly associated with it, closure, the endpoint of directed motion. This reference to tonal function interacts with the serial structure by supporting and clarifying the end of part 1 of the movement. Furthermore, the cadence's stylistic nod to the classical style, and more specifically to the rhetoric of the classical piano repertory, illuminates the delicacy and elegance of the movement overall. Underlying the tonal allusion and its meaning is the movement's characteristic scheme of rhythm, register, and gesture, and its serial pitch structure. I have time to discuss only briefly how the allusion derives from the serial organization, but will be happy to go into more detail later for those who are interested. The cadence contains 5 pitches. As marked on example 3A, they are the 8th through 12th notes of the complete row form IR, the inversion of the retrograde, and one of Stravinsky's basic row forms. Please see example 4 on page 3, which shows Stravinsky's 4 basic row forms for movements. You might wish to hold your hand out so that you can see both pages 2 and 3 at the same time. IR appears at the bottom of example 4, and the pitches involved in the allusion are in bold. IR appears at the bottom of, IR is not a basic form of classic serialism, but rather is peculiar to Stravinsky's practice. Although all 4 of movement's basic row forms arise from the same intervallic structure, only IR contains a group of successive pitches that may be reinterpreted as members of a dominant harmony followed by the root of its tonic resolution. When we hear the tonal allusion, we interpret the 5 pitches of IR as scale degrees sharp 4, 5, natural 4, 7, and 1 in G. The succession of pitches is not sufficient on its own to create the tonal allusion. While maintaining the characteristic rhythmic drive and pointillistic texture of the preceding bars, non-pitch elements in measures 108 to 109 shape the last 5 pitches of IR into the allusion. Most obviously, the sudden change in instrumentation projects the pitches of bars 108 to 109 as a coherent group. The assignment of the allusion to solo piano, unobscured by the competing layers of sound that characterize the preceding bars, enhances its effect. It is easy to hear the D, C, and F sharp in this context as forming a harmony. They are sustained, evenly paced, and registrally close. The concluding G's very low register and contrasting articulation help to mark it as an answer to the decaying chord under which it sounds. Also setting the evoked perfect cadence in relief and reinforcing its cadential status is the silence following it. Measure 110, not on your example, begins with rests. Thus, despite the attacca subito marked below bar 109, the low G is followed not by 1, but by 3/8 rests, the first silence heard in the movement. The allusion to the perfect cadence in bars 108 to 109 is so striking that when it later reappears significantly transformed, it is still recognizable as a cadence. Please see example 3B, which shows the latter half of the movement's third and final part. Bar 135, circled on the right side of the score, reiterates precisely the rhythms, contour, and instrumentation of the cadence closing example 3A. Thus, despite the atonal pitch succession in bar 135, which completes the modified retrograde of the row, the now familiar gesture projects closure on its own, fittingly marking the movement's end. When we listen to example 3B, you will also note in bars 132 to 133 the piano's hurried, premature attempt at a cadence, which foreshadows and thereby strengthens the allusion in bar 135. Let's hear example 3B. The instances of metonymy in this movement point to a significant issue in atonal music. The projection and recognition of closure in this repertory can be very problematic, as anyone knows who, when attending a recital, has seen the performers of an unfamiliar post-tonal work stop playing and wondered whether the piece had ended or was merely pausing. Stravinsky solves this problem in the 4th movement of movements with distinctive allusions to perfect cadences, which represent closure and mark the ends of its outer parts. Furthermore, our identification of these evoked cadences encourages us to rehear the bars that precede them and to consider how these earlier bars fit into the processes that culminate with symbols of closure. Listening in this way reveals a series of events that links to and foreshadows the cadences, thereby forging a powerful narrative that renders the allusions even wittier and more musically satisfying than when perceived in isolation. I have suggested that the evoked cadences and movements represent the end points of musical processes. In contrast, a metonymy in The Flood marks a different point in the trajectory. A late serial work composed by Stravinsky from 1961 to 1962, The Flood is a musical play with dance that presents the biblical story of Noah. Please turn to page 4 for example 5, which is drawn from the building of the ark. The building of the ark is a scene of purely instrumental music that sets the choreography of the historic construction project. Let's listen to example 5. The music in example 5 mimics classical era passages that sit on dominant harmony. The highest line in first oboe, first trumpet, and first violins sounds the scalar segment G, A, B, C, D. This diatonic ascent occurs over chromatic sonorities, but most notably over a repeated G sharp and contrabasses, which, although a semitone too high, mimics the function of a traditional dominant pedal point. So here is the G sharp pedal below the melody. Furthermore, the second oboe and second trumpet accompany melody notes A, B, and D with C sharp, D, and F respectively in a piecemeal version of parallel sixths. So here's the pedal, and then the melody line with the parallel sixths. A normalized version of Stravinsky's passage might sound like this. Even better, take the bars from the last movement of Beethoven's Symphony No. 1 in C major, shown as example 6, located on page 5 of the handout. At the end of the exposition, the ascending stepwise melody from B to F transforms the pedal point G from the tonic of G major to the root of dominant harmony in C major to prepare for the repeat. The bass line, which traverses the fifth G to D, supports the melody in parallel thirds. Here's example 6. Please return to example 5, whether you want to or not. Okay. The movement in which example 5 occurs conveys the complexity and varied activities of the building of the arc through a succession of juxtaposed, musically contrasting passages of varying lengths, an example of the well-known block structure long used by Stravinsky. The chain of juxtaposed passages also suggests a shape for the story of the arc's creation, initially in fits and starts, leading to a long period of intense building, then winding down to the close. Passages of agitated rhythms, frequent changes in motive, and pointillistic lines dominate the movement and convey the effect of many individuals performing different construction tasks. Several contrasting episodes exhibiting chordal textures, prominent stepwise motion, and longer durations begin and interrupt the noise of frantic activity. The excerpt in example 5 is one of these chorale-style passages, which suggest interludes of coordinated efforts when the fruits of individual labors unite. The music of example 5 is the first chorale-style section heard during the most active period of building. In tonal music, sitting on the dominant is frequently the final portion of an introductory or transitional passage that is preparatory in nature. Thus, we may understand the tonal allusion heard in example 5 as representing the function of dominant preparation. In tonal music, such preparation commonly creates anticipation for an important return, as in the Beethoven Symphony example, or the arrival of a new section, as when the second theme in a sonata form follows the end of the transition. In either case, the dominant preparation typically ushers in the key of what follows. By evoking the function of dominant preparation, the passage in example 5 builds strong anticipation. Furthermore, the diatonic melody that is so prominent in the allusion also dominates the chromatic chords that harmonize it. Within a serial work, this situation is marked. Hence, it heightens expectation and even adds a hint of discomfort. In response, the music immediately following the allusion bursts onto the scene with a commotion that combines frantic rhythmic activity, pointillistic lines, and a typically serial chromatic pitch organization. The effect is of chromaticism unleashed, answering both the preparatory function of the allusion and its uneasy balance of diatonic and serial components. So you'll now hear example 5 again, plus the first few bars of music that follow the example. Although the entire movement is serial, it exhibits a variety of pitch resources and techniques which distinguish the component passages. Stravinsky derived all pitches in example 5, including the diatonic scale segment in the highest line, from one of his arrays of transposed rotated hexachords, array IR gamma. Please see example 7a, which is immediately under example 5. To create this array, Stravinsky went to the Flood's row form IR and took its first hexachord, that is, its first 6 pitches. These appear as the array's top line. He then rotated the hexachord 5 times so that each pitch took its turn in the leftmost position, then transposed each of these rotations so that each started with G sharp, the first pitch of the top line. The resulting 6x6 array thus offers 6 rows going across, each of which begins with G sharp and follows it with a unique succession of other pitches. Please note that the label for the array, IR gamma, is the composer's as seen as his sketches. Stravinsky typically used the rows of his 6x6 arrays melodically. In example 5, however, he used the array's 6-note rows as chords, that is, as if the array were repositioned 1/4 turn counterclockwise, as seen in example 7b. The columns in example 7b are numbered 1 through 6 immediately below the array. The same numbers are marked below the corresponding harmonies in example 5. What is now the bottom row, the G sharps in italics, serves as the pedal point in the score. Each harmony in example 5, that is, each sonority over the pedal, contains the remaining pitch classes of each column in the array, without, however, retaining the column's top to bottom order. Thus, the diatonic segment G, A, B, C, D, heard in the highest line of example 5, does not match any single row in example 7b. Rather, as illustrated by the pitches in bold, the scalar melody enlists its members from among different columns while traversing the array from left to right. Essential, then, to the creation of the tonal allusion in example 5 are Stravinsky's creation of the hexachordal array IR gamma, his use of the array as if it were turned counterclockwise, and the top-to-bottom rearrangement of the resulting columns. All of these techniques go far beyond classic serialism. However, they are entirely consistent with Stravinsky's own serial method. A brief additional example evokes the tonal practice of dissonance and resolution, another type of allusion that promotes a sense of directionality. Please turn to page 6 for example 8, which shows a passage from Stravinsky's sacred ballad, Abraham and Isaac, composed from 1962 to 1963. Taking its Hebrew text from Genesis, this work for baritone and chamber orchestra tells the familiar biblical tale. The music in the example occurs toward the end of the work, shortly after the angel of God prevents Abraham from slaying his only son at God's command. In the excerpt, the narrator announces that the angel will speak again. In the ensuing music, the angel conveys God's blessings to Abraham. Example 8 contains two lines, one sung by the baritone and the other played by horn and tuba in alternation. The two lines begin on an octave C sharp. The lower line moves to a new register with each change in pitch, yet we are likely to hear step motion underlying the first three bars. As the vocalist intones his text on C sharp, creating the effect of an inverted pedal point, the tuba moves the lower line to B, forming a major second. Immediately afterwards, this evoked dissonant passing tone seems to resolve to the horn's A. This resolution receives additional emphasis from its placement as the lower line's apex. Indeed, it sounds above the baritone C sharp. Let's listen to example 8. The allusion to a dissonant interval and its resolution in this excerpt may be understood to represent the larger principle of instability moving to stability, hence motion toward a goal. This instance of metonymy enhances the import of the text overall by emphasizing the importance of the angel's coming announcement. In addition, the A that resolves the dissonance sounds during Adonai, highlighting the Hebrew word for Lord. Contributing to the allusion's effectiveness is the lower line's likeness to a conventional bass line. In particular, during the first three bars of the passage, when it moves from C sharp to G sharp, the lower line suggests a pointillistic version of a lament bass, which typically descends by step from tonic to dominant. Heard against the chanting baritone in this austere setting, the tradition-seeped lament bass adds great poignancy to the passage. But why summon that tradition after Isaac's life has been spared? Perhaps because its presence here recalls sorrow in a time of joy, reminding the listener and Abraham of what easily could have been. In doing so, the musical setting helps to infuse the persona of Abraham with humanity. Like much of the pitch material in Abraham and Isaac, the music in example 8 derives solely from Stravinsky's arrays of transposed rotated hexachords. The baritone C sharp and the pitches in the bass line derive from the third row of the hexachordal array I beta, shown in example 9a at the bottom of page 6. The third row is completed in bars 210 and 211, not visible on the example. After his succession of C sharps, the baritone sings the sixth row of hexachordal array I alpha, shown as example 9b. The musical excerpts I have discussed today contain highly idiosyncratic serial techniques, all of which were essential to the crafting of the tonal allusions. Although the absence of verbal statements about this topic by the composer make it impossible for us to confirm that Stravinsky purposely created references to tonal devices, the extremes to which he went to compose the sounds that he apparently desired certainly make such an intent a possibility. In addition, numerous compositional sketches for the serial music, including for the works discussed today, provide ample evidence of Stravinsky's awareness of the internal order of his row forms. For example, Stravinsky frequently notated ordinal numbers by his pitches, apparently keeping track of how he deployed each form. Moreover, Stravinsky's serial music maintains numerous compositional techniques, including block structure and superimposed layers that were common in his Russian and neoclassical music. The incorporation of tonal allusions was an established and significant compositional habit during the composer's long neoclassical period. Why wouldn't this habit also persist in the serial music? As I have attempted to show today, applying the concept of metonymy can enrich our experiences of Stravinsky's later serial music by expanding a work's modes of communication and its potential for narrativity. Furthermore, Understanding allusions to the tonal tradition as metonymies in this repertory casts them as clues that offer listeners and performers ways into musical works that may initially seem abstract, even forbiddingly so. The interaction of tonal allusions and the functions they represent with the serial organization from which they derive yields a complex dialogue between past and present, often with consequences that are expressive and conceptually profound. Thank you.